Okay, so I'm just making a review of the match from Saturday. So let's start with the first game here. It's the first of the 10-minute ones, and I'm playing black. So e4, e6, sort of playing for a French or Dutch, with the chess mood repertoire. d4. So that sends us towards a French. So d5 is my choice. And swag time goes for the exchange French, which is interesting. And knight c3. Now that's kind of a hole in the chess mood repertoire. In chess mood repertoire, black wants to play bishop d6, knight c6, and knight e7. But here I can't play bishop d6 because that hangs the d5 pawn. I can't play knight e7 because that blocks in the f8 bishop. So I spent quite a lot of time thinking over this, about, what does it say, about 40 seconds. And I decided to pin the knight. That allows me to develop the bishop. Without losing the pawn or blocking the development of the knight to e7. So should be able to go on with my plan. It does take an extra tempo, so there's that. But maybe you could say that I haven't really lost a tempo with bishop d2. But it's something I have to think about. Apparently, what's the top reply? c6 is the top reply, right. But I want to play knight c6, really. So I don't want to play c6 if I can avoid it. Because again, that just leaves me with the knight d7 development square. And that sort of conflicts with the light square bishop. Anyway, there is a positive about c6, and it allows me to play bishop d6 without white being able to play knight b5. But let's get back to the game. So I get in my knight e7. Everything's fine so far, more or less. Pardon me. Knight f6. Bishop g4. Perhaps this is a bit premature, right? I could play knight c6 and not put my bishop out. Because with the bishop being developed early, it can be kicked around, and they do see knights before bishops, right? So knight c6 would have been probably a more efficient way of developing. But anyway, bishop e2, fine, unpins the knight. His bishops aren't terribly active, but his knights are both unpinned, which is a positive. While mine are both active, but they're actually both undefended. So that's a potential problem as well. h4, okay, I was getting the early attack, defending the bishop if he moves the knight. I think that's a mistake on my part, to be honest. I should play knight c6 and just continue with my development rather than adding an extra pawn move when I'm already behind in development. But that said, I was a bit concerned about, for instance, if I play knight c6, he plays knight e5, bishop takes e7, knight takes c6. Oh, I'm probably fine, right? Bishop takes d8. Knight takes... bishop takes d1, knight takes d8, rather. Okay, his knight is trapped. So I might be fine. But yeah, I was just a bit concerned about tactics here. So he advances the pawn. Fine, I'm happy with that. My idea is to castle queenside and attack the kingside anyway. So any advance of the pawns gives me a hook to attack. Bring the bishop back. I think this is a mistake. And we'll see the impact of it later. I should play bishop f5. It's more active. Doesn't allow his bishop to come to d3. Puts pressure on c2. But my idea at that moment was just to give an extra defender of the d5 pawn, right? But again, I think I should have played bishop f5. Yeah. There we go. So castle's kingside, knight c6, just trying to develop. I'm way behind in development here. And again, like rook e1, fine, normal. And defend my bishop. And I had a very good reason for this. I don't want him to be able to play knight e5, preempting anything of that. I want to play f6 anyway, so I can play g5. But there's one problem, and that's I'm behind in development. Right, because if he plays knight e5, I can just trade off knights. Should be okay. I just need to get developed quickly. Okay, made a mistake. Kicks bishop. Okay, I don't want to trade the bishop for the knight, really. I like having my bishop pair. Also, if I play bishop takes c3, he can play bc3. And my king's kind of stuck in the center, right? I've messed up my pawn structure on the king's side, so I really don't have the option to mess up the queen side as well, right? So I retreat the bishop. Fine. Pins the knight. Now at this point, I think, how much time am I spending on the clock? Okay, 6 seconds. Okay, only about 7 seconds. Right, yeah, I kind of realised I might be in trouble here, but, you know, I just got to get developed fast. Yeah, bishop d2. I definitely saw that this was coming. But there wasn't a lot I could do to prevent it, so I just have to keep playing. Right, yeah, I spent 13 seconds here. I'm kind of aware that there are some issues here. Knight takes d5. Yeah, he's got a free pawn, the knight's pinned. Actually, this is a mistake, right? I should have played bishop f7. Bishop f7 defends the pawn. It's not active by any means. I'm giving up activity, but holds things together. Okay, so that's a mistake. I really... It's the unfortunateness of having wasted several moves, right? I've moved the light square bishop 3 times. I've moved the dark square bishop twice. And I've made a couple of pawn moves. And my king's still in the center. So white definitely has an advantage here. Takes on d5, I just have to castle. 12 seconds for that. Okay, yeah. But I saw this. And there's nothing I can do to prevent it. I just have to... There we go, I took 50... or so seconds. 49 seconds. Just figuring out, okay, is there any way I can minimize my losses here? Turns out I just have to accept where it's going. Maybe I could hold on to the queens, but white's already like totally in control. I'm better off just trading off the queens. Okay, I lose another pawn in the exchange, but I get the c pawn. And here you can probably say white's better, right? White's a pawn up. But I have the bishop pair in exchange for that. Bishop pair is kind of open. I kind of have the possibility of attacking on the king's side. I have decent control of the situation, but it is white to move. Move I was most concerned about was b4 here, just pressuring my slightly exposed king. Maybe then I won't have time to do anything on the king side. And he's got the rooks. Right? Pressure on my king and I'm a pawn down. Yeah, it's just something to deal with. But no, he pushes the d-pawn, which makes the d-pawn an easy target, right? When it was on the dark squares, yes, okay, it was the same color squares as bishop, same color complex as bishop, but it was defended by the knight. Okay, you could say it was in the way of the knight, but the knight... Right, what? Okay, yeah, the knight's not great, but you need to activate your rooks, you need to pressure my king. d5, white does not have good control of the light squares. He can't defend this pawn. So it's just hanging. And I can now play bishop b3 and slow down any white pressure on the queen side. While attacking this d5 pawn and equalizing material. So I play bishop b3. Right, I did spend 24 seconds on that. I was just sort of debating what I should do. Should I attack the rook on e2? Just like if I am just pushing it around, where will it go? What do I gain from it? Anyway, probably a bit of a waste of time. But yeah, I mean, everything. We've just had a massive change in this situation, so it's reasonable to spend a bit of time figuring out what the heck's going on now. So fine. Okay, knight d4. Okay, I get that you want to activate your knight. So it's an okay square, but it effectively, like the d file, it just provides more shelter for my bishops, surely, right? I'm never going to let you. Oh, 96, I suppose. 96 isn't completely stupid as an idea. Does it hang the knight? It doesn't hang the knight. You're not going to play knight c6. The one move threat on the bishop. Okay, yeah, maybe you want to dislodge the bishop, but I'm not sure it's worth it. Right, the bishop's going to want to move and take the d5 pawn anyway, given a chance. Unless you think knight e6 is a good move. I'm not so sure, but let's give it the benefit of the doubt. Okay, I've grabbed my pawn. I'm being forced to play a move I want to make anyway. Which is something you should never do. Okay. Bishop e6. So he's blocking off the open file that his rook's on. But perhaps he's thinking of attacking on the queen side, right? So he's opening up the line for the rook to come across on the second rank. And perhaps pressuring on a7 as well, right? Okay, fine. But it does also allow me to perhaps play f4 at some point with a tempo. So there's that. Okay, activate the rook. Fine. Maybe it should have gone to the b file. Oh no, it'll get kicked off the b file. It doesn't have a lot of pressure, that's the thing. I mean, where's the rook going to go? I suppose you could say, okay, we're going to play knight f5, knight takes d6, and remove the defender of c7, and pressure the c pawn. But you haven't forced me to exchange bishops here, I don't think. And now I've controlled f4 a bit more. So you're like, I've got pretty good grasp on the dark squares. I've got a very strong grasp on the light squares with my two bishops. And I can just continue pressuring the king side, open up white's king, and sort of get some, well, it's not even counterplay now, right? We're equal material. I've got the bishop pair. Okay, my king is a little exposed, but white's king is about to be in a bit of trouble too. So he plays h4, which is interesting and quite reasonable in a sense. But it does like it releases the tension, gives me the tempo back. I'm not sure how much I want to take on h3, right? My rook's already on the h file, so if you're going to take on g4, I would be happy, but clearly white doesn't want me to play h4, I guess, which is fair enough. Just bring my bishop, open up some pressure on the d file that my rook's already on. Pressure b2. The other thing is I'm closing the e file that white's rook is on, and I'm making it more difficult for, like, it's a bit of prophylaxis on knight f5. So knight f5 is, pardon me, played. Yeah, on the previous move, there was also a potential for like some tactic with bishop takes g2, right? I'm not sure if I actually want to play that, but bishop takes g2, and perhaps I'll win a pawn. Anyway, knight f5. I consider bishop e6, but it's hanging there. He can move the bishop with a threat, and there's also the fact that knight g3 comes with pressure on the bishop. So I didn't really like that, but I do want to dislodge the knight from f5. I want to play f5, f4, dislodge the bishop, really pressure the king, have advanced pawns, so that perhaps I can break it open. But I do have to be aware of Right, hanging bishops in the centre. Right now they're defended. But bishop on e6. Yeah. There's also knight g7, which is a bit awkward, but I can play bishop c8 and the knight's trapped, so maybe not a great idea. But it's yeah, anyway. Knight g3 played. Okay, that's a very passive knight. Where's it going to come out to, right? Okay, it's attacking on h4, but sorry, h5, but I'm defending h5, and it's not the most important pawn. Anyway, rook d5, just defending, well, defending on the 5th rank. I'm defending the h5 pawn by merit of discovery, I suppose. Although not quite, I guess. But anyway, kind of adding some X-ray defense to h5. I'm defending e5 so that I can push f5, f4, and now it's actually a fork. Okay, with bishop on e6, which would be the victim of a discovery in the exchange, but actually capturing on f4 would threaten the rook on c1, so maybe I'm good. Anyway, the idea of f5, f4 is very much in the air. I'm really pressuring the white king. Okay, doubles the rooks on the c-file. I'm not too worried about this though, because what's white's threat? f4? Rook c5? I don't know, but yeah, it's not too clear. So I can just double. Maybe the h5 pawn is hanging. I'm not too convinced though, right? If you play h5 and knight takes h5, it's a trap. Because I can play rook d1 and it's basically mate in 1 or 2. So he brings the knight back. Now that knight's really passive. And to be honest, I would like to exchange, I would like to get rid of that doubled rook there. Maybe that wasn't too clever, but it's just, my king is a little bit more exposed, right? The c-pawn is isolated, and he's pressuring it. So if he can put any more pressure on me, then it might hang, and my king is in check on the same move. So with the idea of pinning the knight, I play rook d1. And perhaps white will be so kind as to exchange the rooks. And I haven't really lost anything there. Probably. That said, after exchanging rooks, this I did miss. He can play rook d2. It doesn't completely force me to exchange rooks. Perhaps I'm best off maintaining the pin on the knight. But it's a little bit awkward. I missed that. Okay. White misclicked here. Apparently he meant to play rook c5. I don't mind rook c5. I'm quite happy to play c6. The b pawn is hanging. The white knight is pinned. I feel like I've got things, well, under control. I'm at least more comfortable than white. But now he's hung the rook. hung the knight. Well, the knight was hanging, I suppose. And mate follows. I don't think this was particularly inefficient even from my play, but understandably white is a little bit flustered from just having lost the game from a relatively, unpleasant but playable position. Anyway, let's go on to the next game. So here we have the second game with with both sides having 10 minutes. Again, following the chess mood repertoire, I played e4, which is quite a change from my previous repertoire where I pretty much stuck with, well, not previous repertoire, my previous habits, which I've pretty much stuck with d4. I have played e4 sometimes, but it's not my main choice ever since when I was playing as a beginner, people were very uncomfortable with d4. Like, everyone plays e4. What are you doing playing d4? And so naturally, I played what made people feel uncomfortable, because why not? But yes, now I'm playing e4. e4, e5, going into the Scotch. Black takes, and plays bishop c5, which is very much main line. So played knight b3, as planned. Let me just have a quick drink. Throat's getting sore with all this talking. Right, yep. Knight b3, bishop b6, knight c6, knight f6, all normal stuff. Knight f6. Now I can play bishop g5 here, and perhaps I should pin the knight. There's nothing really to unpin it. You can advance the h and g pawns to unpin it, but then you're basically committing to castling queenside. Which, okay, fair enough. Perhaps that's what I should play. But I just followed what I thought I should play. Queen e2, castles, and bishop e6. Going for a kingside attack. And I'm quite happy to play this. Rook e8. f3, just defending that e-pawn so I don't lose it. On d5. Now, this is something that has been played 8 times at the master level, according to the according to Lichess's database, with decent success for white. Right, that 50% is pretty good for white. But I can just castle. Nothing to be afraid of here. Black can't really do much with that pawn because the queen's behind it. So I'm now attacking it a third time. I have to be worried about pins of my own, right? The e-pawn is pinned because the bishop on b6 is in tension with the bishop on e3, and the rook's on the e-file. But d4 played. Looking for a fork. I'm attacking it 3 times. It's being defended 3 times. So I can't really take it. I would lose a piece. Or can I? Because the pawn is pinned. So let's say I played knight takes. Knight takes, knight takes. bishop takes. It's hard to say. I think I could win a pawn. But anyway, I just played bishop g5. Very naturally reducing the number of pieces that are attacked and just reducing the threat so that when black moves his queen, my pieces aren't hanging. And the threat on the knight on f6 is not to be ignored either. After all, I'm planning on pushing the kingside pawns, so if I can disrupt black's kingside pawn structure, I might have a more significant attack. Bishop d7. I'm not quite sure what black's trying to do here, just trying to develop, I guess, but... Well, the pawn's still defended twice and attacked twice. But this f6 knight, I can attack it again. And now, how do you defend it? It's defended twice, but I'm guaranteed to mess up the pawn structure or win an exchange. So, I can take. I could take with the bishop, but really I don't want to exchange off the bishop on b6 because that allows black to open up the a file, and opening up files for black to attack my king is not a good idea. So I take with the knight, instead of maintaining the threat on the queen. Rook takes, and I could take back straight away, and queen takes, and not really quite my idea. So e5. The knight can take it, but that would be giving up the piece. The rook's still pinned to the queen, that's the key. I don't have to take it immediately, and this is something you see that on lower levels we like to take we like to cash in what we have straight away. And you can take it too far, but generally you want to prioritize getting a better position over getting material. Getting material is great, but often getting a better position pays off with more material. So cash in, sure, but see if you can make the most of the position you have before cashing in. So e5, h6. And I spent about a minute looking at this. A minute and 5 seconds. Because I can take with a bishop, bishop takes, pawn takes, and I can disrupt black's pawn structure. Perhaps that's the better move. I didn't really... This was kind of a problem. I didn't really calculate this clearly enough. All I knew was that I had to try and find a favourable way of exchanging this, right? I have about 3 candidate moves. I can play pawn takes f6, I can play bishop h4, or I can play bishop takes f6. I could also try just doing something else, just let black take my pawn and then take his rook, but that loses me a pawn, so it would have to pay off quite a lot, and I don't see anything that really pays off that much. Perhaps a4, but maybe not. That would open up the rook. Again, this is opening up the rook by winning the bishop, was what I was saying. So I played pawn takes with the idea that at least I can play h4, right? I've lured his g-pawn forward, and I can play h4 and try and open up the position. queen f6. Smart move. It's about here I realised, okay, I've won an exchange, but I've kind of lost the initiative, right? He's got this d pawn, the rook's going to come to the e file and kick my queen. Right now it's black's turn to play, and he's got good control of the center. He's got a bishop pair, which can sometimes be as dangerous as the rook pair, or more so. So I have to be careful, and rather than going all out with like I've won an exchange, now I'm going to attack. No, I need to develop my pieces. I need to. Right, my pieces are relatively passive while blacks are quite active. I need to develop my pieces. So, okay, I just brought my king over. Defend the a-pawn, bit of prophylaxis. I wasn't too sure what I wanted to do, but I didn't want to allow queen f4 or something like that. Right, it's another annoying move with tempo which could cause trouble. Just get the king away from being exposed. So he attacks my queen. Again, I spent about 40 seconds and came up with the wrong move. I was looking for something active to play with my queen, and there wasn't anything active to play with my queen. I should have just picked queen d2, which is the best square for it. It still pressures. Okay, it doesn't really pressure the d-pawn because there's two defenders of the d-pawn. So even if I take with my knight, the material exchange would go against me, even with three attackers. Oh, there's three defenders actually. The queen's defending as well. But I do pressure the g-pawn, and I open up my bishop. Here, I actually failed to open up my bishop because bishop d3 would leave my queen very vulnerable. So bishop d2 was the better move. I realised I'd messed up when he attacks, so I just have to go back to e2. There's no point looking for good squares over in the middle of the board now. I just have to try and rearrange my queen. Bishop to f5. Again, I couldn't play queen d3 because of this bishop f5 move. As much as I would have liked to, because it would have put pressure on h7. Queen d2. Just trying to develop my bishop. Actually, his rook on e8 isn't defended anymore, which perhaps I missed. See, the move before, the rook is defended by the bishop, so any move of the knight is a threat on my queen. But now it isn't. Now his knight is pinned into his rook. So, I might have missed that. Queen d2. Right, yeah. The knight on the pawn on d4 is hanging. I missed that for sure. And he pushes the pawn, which is frankly a really annoying move for me to deal with. It opens up the scope of his bishop, and it means before, although the d4 pawn was cramping my position, it was also kind of shielding my pieces from his developed, like shielding my vulnerable pieces from his developed king. Now, it isn't anymore. I have to take with the bishop and get what development I can out of this. But he has sacrificed a pawn for this. Pins my bishop with his queen, with his rook rather, and the rook is defended on d8 now. So queen e2. At this point I had realised that if he plays rook e8 again, the pin will be on the knight rather than the pressure on my queen. He takes. Again, perhaps he's trying to get the exchange back. About 24 seconds. I had a bit of a think about it, perhaps a longer think than I needed to. But it's a dangerous position for me. He's still got the 2 bishops. He's got a lot of pressure. And he attacks the pawn once more. Only way to defend the pawn again is to bring the knight back. Bishop d4, again, just very natural looking moves black is getting to play, but I'm okay here. The queen's defending on b2, the rook and knight are defending the pawn, which is now only attacked by the bishop unless you make a discovery on with the bishop on d4. So I play h4. If he takes on h4, I can develop my rook to h4 with a great square, threats of rook h8, trade off the rooks, and hope that my exchange works out. Or perhaps just some really nasty pressure on his king. However, it works out, it would be good for me. But no, plays g4. Interesting choice. But fg4, I won another pawn. I've now got 3, 6, not going to count the one on g7, because it's very unlikely to survive, and he's got 4. So I've got some pawns for my trouble. And I've kicked his bishop again. The bishop has to move. So bishop h7 makes sense. Bishop g6 wouldn't help him at all. In fact, it might even allow me to play h6, and then his king is really perhaps in a lot of trouble. So I bring my rook to the f-file. I feel like it's a waste of, well, not necessarily a waste of time to push my pawns, but it's too slow. Black still has a lot of pressure on my king. And I feel like pressuring f7 is the way to go. Perhaps I can double on the f-file. I can at least bring the rook to f3, add another defender to the d3 pawn. We'll have to see how it goes. Queen b6. Okay. My queen's defending b2, but I don't really like this. However, the d3 pawn is adequately defended. I've got 2 defenders, even if I move the knight, and the most he has is 3 attackers, so I just block the threat. Just a bit of prophylaxis again. Perhaps he could play a5, a4 though. But I guess you could be thought to be threatening the bishop on d4 as well, which might actually be a sensible thought. So he moves the bishop, takes on g7, makes sense. Now we've got just 2 minutes left. So my choice was attack the rook, attack the pawn on f7, pressure black's king. Right, I can't be on the defensive too much here. And black makes a mistake, an understandable one. Bishop takes d3 would have been a better choice. It comes with check. Although, perhaps it doesn't help him at all anyway. I'm not forced to take it. He is threatening a discovery, even a double attack, right? Rook d1 rook takes d1 would be mate if black can play it, because of the double check. But I can take f7 with check, king h8, queen takes f8, check, bishop g8 is forced. And now there isn't any threat. I'm actually a rook up right now. And I get to take another rook. I think that's the best move. Brings the queen in to pin the rook. Okay, a bit desperate, but fair enough. I'm not sure. My choice was to force the exchange of queens. I'm not sure that was the best move. Perhaps rook f5 would have been better. Just threatening, basically threatening mate. So, not the most accurate, but with a minute left on the clock, that's the move I made. Just simplify. Sometimes accuracy is quicker than simplifying though. So, for games without increment, accuracy is very important. So, forced exchange of queens, blunders the bishop, but it's understandable. At this point, he's just playing to try and flag me. Right, my material is completely excessive. Perhaps he's also hoping for a stalemate. So, just finishing the game. Again, my accuracy isn't perfect, but it's good enough to win. On to the third game. Now we're on to 5+0. Again, I drew white in the random for start. So we have a repeat of the previous game in terms of playing a Scotch. Very much a repeat of the previous game, but black plays knight e7 this time, trying something a bit different. Queen e2, played the same thing. Knight g6. Definitely not a fan of this. My intention is to attack on the king side anyway. So I don't feel like the structure favours black at all, compared to the previous one. He was probably trying to avoid any pins on the h4 d8 diagonal, which makes sense considering he suffered from that in the last game. But I just carry on. d6 played instead of d5. Fair enough, d5 didn't work out too well for him last time. g3. I probably should have played f5, rather f4, but I was a little bit hesitant about leaving the e-pawn undefended. f4 would have been quicker though, since I can play g4 straight away. Anyway, so I might have lost the tempo on this. Bishop e6. Fair enough. Whatever. f4. Now I'm threatening to fork the pieces. I'm rapidly advancing my pawn storm on his king, and he has to address this problem of the two pieces now. So he exchanges. He didn't actually have to do that immediately, since even if I fork the pieces, he can still do this. He could have taken the opportunity to make an in-between move of his choice if he felt that it would benefit him, but perhaps he didn't feel it was necessary, or more likely he just didn't think of it. Knight b4. Is he trying to play d5? Is he trying to play c5? c5 just blocks in his own bishop, so it doesn't seem like the greatest move, to be honest. It doesn't really create any threats. It leaves a backward d-pawn. Most logically, he'd be trying to play d5, but, well, perhaps knight a2 at some point, if my knight ever moves. That would also make sense. Although, for what purpose is not so clear. h4, just carrying on with my plan of storming the king's side. And a natural way to open up my rook. I'm happy enough with that. c5. What's the point? I mean, he could play e4 now. It does defend the knight, but now his dark square bishop is really passive. And the d-pawn's backward. h5, just carry on with my plan. Dislodge the knight, advance the pawn, open up my rook. Knight e7, again supporting d5 possibly, or even f5. I didn't want to play h6 because g6, and perhaps black can weather the storm just by rearranging his pawn structure and just sort of survive by merit of my pawns defending him. So I played f6 as a sort of preemptive. And also, if he plays d5 now, I could play e5 and perhaps... There's an interruption. Yeah, I could play e5 and f6, and g6 doesn't become quite as pleasant for black anymore. Black plays d5. I put in f6 because if black plays gf6, I can play bishop h6 and threaten mate. I don't mind giving up a pawn for this situation. But he moves the knight, attacks the pawn, but now I have e5. This was the merit of playing f5 early. I have a strong grasp on the king's side, really horrible attack. I'm not sure if black could even defend this with best play. e5, d4, again trying to fork my pieces, but this just doesn't work. I'm not sure this is the most accurate. I could have just played queen g4 and gone for mate. I think that would have been the best play. So in a way, I'm not too happy with that choice. But again, it's not terrible, but I need to learn to be accurate. Queen e8, putting pressure on e5, and now the threat on c3 is real, but my threat is just as real and more forcing. g6 is forced. And again, perhaps this is not entirely accurate. Bishop c4, but it makes sense in this position. Don't hang any pieces if there isn't a need to. Brings the knight in. There's no point to this. Bishop c4 was my plan anyway, and now it comes with a threat on the knight. Since I wanted to pin the pawn on f7 anyway, now how's he going to defend the knight? Either way, it's not going to be a great result for black. Probably not the best choice he could have made. Again, he renews the pin on the f7 pawn for me, very kindly, and I don't mind losing the bishop. I do want to take it back, though. It's just stability. My attack's not going away. A sort of desperate defense, perhaps? It's really not clear, and it doesn't need to be. I'm just winning a few moves. And mate. There wasn't a lot that black could do. So, moving on to the last game. The last game. Okay, I'm playing black again. Swag Time plays e4 again. And we repeat this exchange French. I didn't really like how the last game went. I mean, I won, but clearly there were some problems with my development. I just played too many moves, taking my development. So, I played knight f6. It seemed like the natural thing to do. I don't like it because of... Well, okay, he played bishop e2 straight away. And I went on with my bishop d6 idea. But knight b5 is also an annoying threat. Okay, he develops his knight. I castle. We're going for rapid development here. I try and threaten his knight again. After all, a pin's a pin. He counterpins. This is a bit more awkward for me though, because his bishop's on e2. Mine is not on e7 anymore, so I will have wasted a move. Awkward. I don't want to play bishop e7, but if I move my queen, my knight's going to hang. Well, not hang, but it's going to disrupt my kingside pawn structure, which is not what I want. c3. I have to defend this d5 pawn, which is kind of hanging. And preventing knight b5 is what I want to do now. Ironically, this is the move I avoided in the opening, which is one of the main lines. So I ended up playing it later anyway. I could have just played it straight away. Knight e5. Just putting pressure on the light square bishop. And e5 is quite an annoying square to have the knight on anyway. I trade off the light squared bishops. After all, it's his better bishop in terms of pawn structure, and my worst bishop. That said, his dark square bishop is being quite annoying right now. Exchange off. h6 is fine. We're both castled kingside. Makes sense. But here I was a bit rash. I really shouldn't play g5. I've done it a few times. It's bad for the pawn structure. Bad for the king safety. It's just not a good move, but I played it. Bishop to g6, fine. I developed my knight. Now, there is an issue here that the bishop on d6 is hanging. So knight takes f7, threatens the queen and threatens my bishop. It wins a pawn. Perhaps not the best move for white to play in the situation, but still an annoying one. And it does win a pawn. But f4 was played, which is very reasonable and perhaps more accurate than knight takes f7. Here, I had realised that the bishop was hanging, that f7 was a problem. So I tried to defend the bishop, threaten what I thought in the heat of the moment was a hanging queen, but it wasn't actually hanging because the knight on c3 defends it. Still, queen e7, fine. Takes on g5, takes on g5. I am in trouble here though. I have a rather backward f-pawn, a rather over-advanced g-pawn, and a bit of a vulnerable king. So I'm really just trying to hang on in this position. Doubles. I kind of have to double too. I can't just leave my queen hanging to a discovery. Pressures the bishop on, not bishop, the knight on f6 and the pawn on f7. Also, again, threatening the discovery on the queen. So I went for the easy way out. Perhaps not a great move though. Brings the pawn into an even more threatening position. My idea was I avoid the fork with a tempo move, but whether or not it helps White's king, it doesn't help me any. The bishop is not better placed on the diagonal, even though I might have threats of mate on the h-file. That was my idea. I have threats of mate. I reduce the threat on my king by removing an attacker, but in the end I didn't actually remove an attacker. I just exchanged the knight on e5 for a pawn on e5. So I did make a bit more space for myself, but I also made, well, I exchanged a defender for bringing in another attacker, which isn't great. So the king moves over. I'm not sure about this. Knight h7 would defend the pawn again. My idea was pressure the pawn on e5. Perhaps I'll be able to win the pawn, or at least just exchange stuff off and be safe. But perhaps knight h7 would have been a better move in terms of just defending, which is what I need to do right now. Queen f5. And the problem here is the queen has to stay on the dark square diagonal. But how do I extricate myself from this situation? King g7 was my best idea, just trying to sort of untangle my pieces best I could. Perhaps I can put pressure on the h-file. At least my king's closer to the pawn, which is basically holding the defense together on g5. Again, I would have liked to play queen e6 and bring my queen over, but that just hangs the pawn. Maybe I should have, because it doesn't just hang the pawn. It does allow me to bring the queen over and improve my king's safety. Again, I have an opportunity to play that, and I probably should have. But there we go. Admittedly, now the queen's moved, if I play queen e6, then rook f6 is kind of annoying, since knight takes f6, ef6 comes with check and hangs my queen, but rook f6, queen takes g5, the queen is hanging, so there is that. Rook h1, I have to find something. Okay, I did spend 24 seconds on it, which is probably a bit much, but I'm really just trying to hang on, and a bit of a counter threat. You never know what it might turn into. Rook f5. Now the pawn is hanging and my king doesn't have much of anywhere to run to. So, king g6. I have to defend somehow. Perhaps I might be able to play something like knight f6 and hang on with my defense. But another attacker. Perhaps I should still try playing knight f6. That might have been sensible. But no, knight f6 would lead to mate because queen takes g5. That can't be good. So f6. Same thing, but defending on the diagonal has to be a bit better. e4 pawn is pinned. So he advances the pawn. That's annoying. Best I can do, try and dislodge the attackers. Perhaps I might be able to get some sort of mate on h7. You never know. Queen f6. And now I have 28 seconds left. I don't really have time to think. I just have to play. My opponent has 1 minute and 30 seconds left. If I don't just play, I lose on the clock. But I spent 13 seconds. Again, I'm really trying to hang on. So, yeah, not great. Queen comes back. 4 seconds to take the rook. Again, I just have to play something. It's an exchange of rooks. Perhaps mate was there somewhere. In fact, queen d3 is an immediate mate. There we go. I get the bishop. I'm really just making moves. At this point, I've realised I've lost the game on time. And a few more moves, just pre-moving sometimes. There we go, I pre-moved that one. I was prepared for the moves. Perhaps I should have pre-moved a bit more. You never know what you might get, but it's easy to lose anyway. 0.8 seconds, I don't even have time with pre-moving. And here I ran out of time. And that was the end of the match. I did win it, but it was a bit shaky. Other impressions? I mean, my prep did serve me well. It meant I had some idea of what I was doing, whatever came up. But not enough of an idea. Not yet. But then again, it's quite early days in my opening repertoire, so I still have some familiarity to gain. I'm happy I won the match, but yeah, I have still a lot of improvement to make. Incidentally, I am actually a piece up here, but I'm out of time, so. Anyway, with that said, that's it for my review. I might make another overall summary, but I don't think so. I think I've covered everything. There we go.